I very much agree with the idea that we can't think about prosperity in terms of wealth creation and GDP, but it's very much more about what that means in people's own lives. I think I draw attention to two particular things. So one, prosperity makes me think in the negative to a certain extent. What does it mean to be free from hunger or pain or illness or death or war or crime? What does it mean to be free from boredom or constraint or a lack of opportunity? And so I think prosperity at one level is being free from those things. I think in the positive, we can also then see prosperity as being about the ability to make meaningful decisions over one's own life. I'm taken by a lot of the work on what a good life looks like, but I'm not sure that we know who should be judging that. And I think we need to be very careful in assuming that we might know what prosperity means for particular people and their families, whilst also recognising that we have responsibilities as public organisations or universities to enable people to make as many different choices as they can in their lives that they think will benefit them, themselves, and their families and their communities. Cities are, of course, actually not one single unit. They're made up of many different actors, local authorities, public administrations, voluntary organisations, businesses, community groups, tenants and residents associations. So the idea that cities alone as one unit can harness the power of knowledge to address complex issues is quite challenging. What's actually needed is collective intelligence, where we bring these different organisations and individuals together to think about how those wicked, complex challenges facing cities and urban communities can be addressed. And I think there are a number of things that are required there. The first is recognising that no actor can have the solutions or think about even the problems and how we address them and frame them in isolation. So this requires very different ways of working together to produce collective intelligence. It also requires recognising that actually there may be a lot of contestation over what is required and that pathways may be contested between different groups. So processes need to take that into account and also be modest about the limits of what we can know. The world is very complex, social and global challenges operate at multiple levels. So the idea that we actually can know everything is quite a difficult one. So we need to be much more comfortable with uncertainty and with the idea that sometimes we can only partially know what we can do and we have to operate in good faith. And that requires a very different way, I think, of thinking about knowledge and its relationship to the city. So co-production is one pathway that's becoming increasingly popular as a way to bring people together to think about pathways to desirable urban futures. I am a critical advocate. I'm healthily sceptical about what the strengths and limitations of this approach are. And I think it's very important that we don't adopt a one-size-all solution. I think co-production can play a role if it takes seriously questions of power and the politics that sit behind different forms of collaboration. Not everyone in these partnerships is equal or is starting with a similar level of knowledge, expertise, confidence or capacity to engage. So there are a huge number of issues about readiness for co-production to really be the outcome of and a process of equal partnership. I think what that also means is that co-production needs to engage with the idea of epistemic justice much more seriously. It can be a strategy for really giving voice to people who don't otherwise have a say in which kinds of futures we want for our cities and our communities. And I think the challenge there is that to date, a lot of the work on co-production has been about doing with people, not to them. That's the mantra, let's do with, not to. And I don't think enough focus has been placed on how we need to actually think together and think with people in different kinds of processes. Because actually the world is very complex, uncertain, volatile, there's conflict and social disasters, climate change everywhere. So we can't actually assume that we know where we want to go, where our pathways are going to take us. And so what that actually means is that we need to think together before we can do together. So my call would be to place a bit more emphasis on that, on thinking together and not just doing together through co-production processes. So although Labour has recommitted to the devolution agenda, this isn't a party political issue. The devolution journey actually started decades ago under a Labour administration, with devolution in the late 1990s to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. But it's been continued in various forms and shapes by the coalition government, by the Conservative government. It was the coalition government, in fact, who introduced the city deals in the 2000s. And so I think actually we need to stop thinking about this as a party political issue and really think about what's in it for local communities and local people. I think to make devolution matter, there are three things that are crucial. The first is to be very clear on what we mean by devolution and what the purpose is. Is this just an agenda to produce the kinds of wealth creation and industrial strategies that we've seen in the past? Or is it following the kinds of things that the Institute for Global Prosperity are interested in, about different kinds of pathways, more democratic forms and processes of decision making? I think the second question is really about whether devolution is just passing the buck or passing the power. And that's really important, because quite often in the past there has been an increase of responsibility to local authorities or combined authorities to deliver particular services without them necessarily having the levers, the resources or the funding to actually do that. And I think the third thing is to really, for the Labour government to get their heads around the fact that devolution is a process and it's not an event. As an event, you can sit down and define who does what are the roles and responsibilities of different organisations, how much budget is attached to which, how are the decisions going to get made. But as a process, it really requires rethinking the role between Whitehall, the regions and our major cities. And I think this was really well illustrated during the COVID pandemic, when actually we reverted very much to a command and control system, and localised knowledge about what was happening outside of London was not taken into account in any centralised decision making. So we saw city regional mayors like Andy Burnham really stand up and speak for their region, but that local knowledge was often dismissed, even though at the same time, of course, the government was eulogising the idea of common sense in order for us to determine what it was we were going to do. So I think that's really important, because the COVID pandemic gives us an insight into how Whitehall often thinks about expertise outside of the centre. And if we're serious about devolution as a process, it needs to take seriously other forms of local, regional expertise and how they shape central decision making, as well as just what happens at the local level.